When I was an adolescent, I longed to live in a world like Star Trek, the original series. Not one dominated by science and reason. Mr. Spock was my idol. His devotion to reason, logic, as he called it, and his lack of superstition inspired me. Growing up in a very turbulent era in the Deep South, I was exposed daily to unreason in the form of a very legalistic religious view and unjust concepts of human nature. I wanted to live in a world of the future where most people were reasonable, science was respected, and justice was a matter of galactic concern. In short, I was probably a humanist and didn't know it. Today I want to share with you what I know about humanism as believed by the American Humanist Association, which informs our religious movement. Sometimes in our movement, humanism is equated with atheism, but that is not correct. Most humanists are atheists, but not all atheists in our congregations are necessarily humanists. Conversely, some who consider them humanists are also theists in some way that is out of the norm for theism. As I have traveled with humanists throughout the past 34 years, I've come to recognize that this religious perspective can be interpreted in as many ways by Unitarian Universalists as any other beliefs. I'm not a humanist. My college roommate was a member of the American Humanist Association, and I consider myself mostly liberal Christian. So you would think that our home would be a little bit unusual, but we really got along very well. And we had our coffee table in our living room. She would read my volumes like Christian Century and the EU Christian Fellowship's publications, and I would read her Humanist magazine, and we would talk about the articles. So amongst Unitarian Universalism, there's not this great divide over theology. Some people I know a few couples that are very theologically divided, but it's not a problem for them. I share this with you today because I hear sometimes people say, I'm an atheist, when they are talking about their theology, and feel that this might describe a belief about God, but does not share one's beliefs about what gives life purpose or meaning. Saying atheist is only a negation of someone else's belief. The service is the first in a series this year that I will be giving about theologies commonly found among Unitarian Universalists. Religious humanism, as understood in our movement, is really a product of the 20th century. In 1933, a group of religious humanists, mostly from the Chicago area, and about half of them, I believe, were Unitarians or Universalists, together composed a brief document outlining the basic principles of humanism as they understood it. They called the document the Humanist Manifesto. It was not intended as an anti-religious statement, but a testament to their actual faith. In some ways, their words reflect the priorities of their time. The beginning of the Humanist Manifesto, the first one, sets the stage for the following beliefs. It reads, "The time has come for widespread recognition of the radical changes in religious beliefs throughout the modern world. The time has passed for mere revision of traditional attitudes. Science and economic change have disrupted the old beliefs. Religions the world over are under the necessity of coming to terms with new conditions created by vastly increased knowledge and experience. In every field of human activity, the vital movement is in the direction of a candid and explicit humanism. These men endeavored to put to words a new religious vision that they had. They were intentionally stating their views were religious, binding them together in a common source that would speak to the reality as they experienced it. Some of them were Unitarian ministers, and one was a Universalist minister. They were not disowning religion. Rather, they felt that the religious enterprise of Western culture needed to change direction in order to gain relevance. They believed that the superstitious idolatries of the past were preventing a new reality from being born. By holding on to their old God, believing in heaven, and clutching to ancient creeds, that humanity, at least the European Caucasian variety, was stunted by religious views that did not encourage progress. Humanists were not looking toward God to bring justice. They were not waiting for an afterlife to live finally in the world of which they dreamt. So what does humanism, as defined by the original Humanist Manifesto, actually hold? Humanists do not believe that the earth was created nor that humankind was created. They believe that religion must answer to science and that the time is past for theism and deism. They believe that religion consists of those actions, purposes, and experiences that are humanly significant, and deny the distinction between sacred and secular. For humanists, the heightened sense of personal life and the cooperative effort to promote social well-being are religious purposes. Humanists deny belief in the supernatural. Humanists seek to affirm life rather than deny it, and endeavor to establish the conditions of a satisfactory life for all, not merely for the few. This is a summary of the basic tenets of the original Humanist Manifesto. The original signers of the Humanist Manifesto included educational philosopher John Dewey and Lester Mondale, a Unitarian minister most notable nowadays for being the half-brother of former Vice President Walter Mondale. The original Humanist Manifesto came at a desperate time, and it demonstrates the nature of society in the midst of the Great Depression, when both communism and fascism were taking hold throughout the world. In that summary, I intentionally omitted the most controversial clause of the original Humanist Manifesto, the one that dealt with economic issues. The original Humanist Manifesto called for a socialist economy with the equitable distribution of the means of life. More benignly, the Humanist Manifesto stated that the goal of humanism is a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Now, intelligently is always a thing that is relative, so it's a difficult thing to define. But you'll probably notice that this is the original Humanist Manifesto of 1933 to which I have referred. Since that time, the Humanist Manifesto has been rewritten twice to deal with a changing world. The version from 1973, the second Humanist Manifesto, is extremely long and seems dated to our own ears these days. Yes, it railed against believing in God, but it also waxed ecstatic about space travel to other worlds and the joys of human sexuality. You are ahead of me if you can read the second Humanist Manifesto without imagining it being written by a bunch of guys wearing love beads and lime green polyester leisure suits. The most recent form of the Humanist Manifesto was written about 20 years ago and marks a significant departure from the first two versions. Most remarkable in the most recent version of the Humanist Manifesto is that it contains no language condemning a belief in God or other deities. Gone is the strident language condemning theism or deism or any other religious beliefs. The most theologically based point in the third Humanist Manifesto is the opening sentence. It reads, "Humanism is a progressive philosophy of life that, without supernaturalism, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity." That is the most theologically based perspective in the entire Third Humanist Manifesto. And it is based almost entirely upon one clause, without supernaturalism. So what happened to the American Humanist Association? Did it decide that its perspective was wrong all along? The answer is probably found in 4 developments. The original founders of the humanist movement believed that religious beliefs in God were hampering human progress and the quest for justice. Later, humanists witnessed the civil rights movement, led often by Christian ministers, and felt their faith and reason as a vehicle for human progress shaken to the core. They had believed with Karl Marx that religion was the opium of the masses. Yet when it came to it, their modernist, scientific, reasonable worldview had contributed relatively little to societal change compared to the passion of a Baptist minister who proclaimed so passionately, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." To condemn theistic perspectives is in some ways to be critical of the power that a belief in God has to change lives and society. The Marxist view of religion was opposite of the way that the movement to justice in our American society had happened. Some traditional religions were working for societal change, and it was clear that believing in God or holding other non-humanist beliefs did not mean that one was unreasonable nor not allied in some ways with the view of the world that the humanists were trying to create. The second point is something I realized by reading Unitarian Universalist Humanist articles and sermons from the 1960s in the library of one of the congregations I served. The articles and sermons were written by Unitarian Universalist ministers, and they wrote in complete ideological abstraction. After reading them over the course of hours, I found that not one of the sermons deviated from the purely abstract and ideological. They were written by educated white men and ironically never came down to a human level. They liked stories, jokes, passion, pathos, or just plain mentioned that human beings experienced emotions or needed to be hugged or hear a loved one's voice. The humanist ministers were engaged in abstraction rather than being human. Their writings were as detached from human experiences as the ideologies they condemned in other religious beliefs. The humanists needed to keep it human. Then there was the advent of postmodernism. Modernism was the belief in a rational, scientifically based universe as the only form of truth. Humanism was, despite language condemning modernism in the first manifesto, the penultimate philosophical or religious expression of modernist belief. Postmodernism began in the 1970s in our academic cultures, and it could be best to summarized as leading to a multiplicity of truth with the possibility that each has some contribution to make. In postmodernism, differing views are affirmed as leading to a greater complexity and contributing to the larger conversation. There's a diversity of opinion, and that was not something the humanists were originally open to. It is likely that the most recent version of the Humanist Manifesto recognizes the need for humanists to work with people who hold different ideas. Humanism is not as strident in its absolute correctness as it once was. It is no longer holding that progress can come exclusively through its religious views. Besides, it is rare for any religious movement to state in its founding principles a denial of the religious beliefs of others. It's probably not healthy to find one's faith in reaction to the belief that others hold. It doesn't give a common ground for conversation or even for a common cause. And certainly our society right now has that kind of polarity. Earlier, I spoke of doubting in God when I was an adolescent and into my early adulthood. At that point in my life, the God that I knew best was the one I encountered in Southern Christian fundamentalism. That God was a harsh, racist, sexist, homophobic, judging deity. And I rejected that form of God then, and I do now. Yet I long to be religious. I longed to discover a religious perspective that was rational, yet bound everything together. How does one behave ethically without the prescriptions of traditional religion? Where might one find meaning and purpose? Religious humanism provides an answer to this query. Is humanism religious? One of the distinctions between humanism and atheism is ethical. An atheist does not believe in God, but that does not mean that she or he has any greater purpose or ethical structure. Humanists believe that without God, one has to live in a way that advances humanity. They are willing to make sacrifices and often take personal risks to ensure that a better world can be created. It is not merely music or poetry or ideals that make someone a religious humanist. The religious part of humanism comes from the willingness of someone to sacrifice some part of herself or himself, whether it be money, time, energy, space, privilege, or something else to the common good, to contribute to a world in which nature is respected, no one is in need, and everyone has the ability to develop his or herself. Poverty and disease are no more, and everyone has freedom to be and to participate in society without fear. To be a humanist in our tradition, therefore, is to be a religious humanist. Today, the plurality of Unitarian Universalists consider themselves religious humanists, and their spirit is still strong in our movement. The kind of strident humanism that mocked any other religious perspective is waning among us. We recognize that in our postmodern movement, the religious truth is often subjective. I want to share today as we close that I'm not a humanist in the sense of the Humanist Manifesto. I believe in a God who works through history in ways that we cannot always perceive. I do not fear humanism, though. Rather, I draw strength that some of those who do not believe as I do travel with me and still hear me occasionally say a prayer or quote the Bible in ways that they do not understand. I'm also grateful that in the absence of supernatural belief, some people choose to focus on the good that they can do here and now. Let us be grateful for the presence of reason among us and the charitable impulse to bend the arc of history toward justice. Let us be grateful for faith that speaks to human need. Let us be glad that whatever doubts we might have in our lifelong struggle, that the connections of community still bind us together. Let us be grateful that a humanist faith of heart and mind still resonates among us. Blessed be, so be it. Amen.